So what happens if the two notes that are given to you for intervals does not fit into a major scale? Well, let's start with this perfect fifth from C to G. Notice that G is in the major scale, so C up to G, that is a perfect fifth. But what happens if you go to C to a G flat or C to a G sharp? Now remember, since it's some kind of C to some kind of G, they will all be fifths of some kind. That won't change. But the interval quality will. For perfect intervals, if the distance between the two intervals decreases, like this C to G going to C to G flat, the interval becomes diminished. So that is a diminished fifth. If from the perfect interval C to G, the interval distance between the interval expands, it becomes augmented. And that is an augmented fifth. Let's do that one more time on a different note. Let's go from a G to a G. Notice that's an octave or an eighth. And since this G is in the G major scale, that's a perfect octave. But even octaves can be diminished and augmented. Let's start with the diminished. So it's still going to be an octave, so let's find what's in the major scale first by finding that perfect octave. And that perfect octave is diminished, going closer together, so it's G to G flat. If we're looking for an augmented octave, we first do the perfect octave, and then an augmented we get further apart. A G to a G sharp. That's how perfect intervals work. Notice here we have F's and A's. We know our F major scale, and in our F major scale, there is an A. So we know right now that all of those are major thirds. And let's put it right here. But what happens when we alter that major third? For instance, what happens if we go to an A flat, or F up to A sharp, or even F up to A double flat? Well, let's first start with the most common one. If we have a major third, F to an A, the major third gets closer together with F to A flat, it becomes a lowercase m and a minor interval. If, like F to A sharp, the interval expands, it becomes augmented, just like our perfect intervals. So F up to A sharp is an augmented third. And one more, if we have F to an A, which is major third, F to an A flat, which is a minor third, and F to an A double flat, they've gotten that much closer together. It is diminished. So this is a diminished third. Let's do it on one more note so you can see it. And let's start with a major seventh, C to B. And we know that B is in the C major scale, so we know that is a major seventh. If we want to make that minor, we simply lower that top note and make it a minor seventh. And we can lower it one more time, and this will actually be something that's relatively common. C up to B double flat will be a diminished seventh. And one more, C up to B sharp will be an augmented seventh. So notice everything should be pretty easy when you know the scale, the major scale of the bottom note. But what happens if you don't know the major scale of the bottom note? Notice here we have a D sharp going up to a B. And up to this time, we would always take that lower note and create a major scale. But D sharp major is a hypothetical scale that would have more than 7 sharps. So we really can't think of our D sharp major scale right now. We can, however, think of our D major scale. And we should easily be able to figure out what a D up to a B is, because the B is in the D major scale. If the B is in the D major scale, we know this is a major sixth. And what happens when we have a D up to a B and now a D sharp up to a B? Remember, those two notes have gotten closer together. So major sixth becomes a minor sixth. Let's do another one just to make sure you have it. Let's do an E sharp up to a D. Now, it may take some time to be able to get to this interval, but you should be able to do it. Well, let's start with something we know. Let's start with an E. Now remember, this is some kind of E to some kind of D, so it's going to be a seventh. So let's figure out the major seventh first. Our E major scale has a D sharp. Notice it's not going to take one alteration to be able to get to this pair right here. It's going to take two. First, let's take away that D sharp, because that should be something we're pretty familiar with. Notice those two notes have gotten closer together. This major seventh becomes a minor seventh. And notice from here to there, that E sharp and D, notice that D stayed the same, but the E sharp got closer. So this is again closer together. So this is a diminished seventh. These diminished seventh especially will actually come in handy and will be seen fairly often in the future. So you need to be able to make sure you're comfortable with recognizing diminished sevenths. And let's do one more on a perfect interval. Let's do G sharp up to D. Notice it's some kind of G to up to some kind of D, so you know this is going to be a fifth. But let's start with one we're more familiar with, a G and a D. We know the G major scale very easily, and we know that that G major scale has a D in it. So this is going to be a perfect fifth. Notice from G to D and then G sharp to D, these two notes are closer together. So a perfect interval will not be minor. Remember, perfect intervals become diminished. That's a very common problem, to forget that perfect intervals become diminished. Perfect intervals do not become minor. But there it is, how you go from a perfect fifth to a diminished fifth by altering that lower note. It will take some time to be able to perfect this skill. That's why you have quite a bit of homework for the assignment for this module, but take a lot of time and figure it out, because this will be a subject that will carry through all of your music theory and into the praxis exam. So yes, perfect this skill and let me know if you're having trouble.